morning and welcome to the Point. This past week in Lansing, the governor and Republican legislative leaders continued to compare ideas on a budget, even as the full legislature is preparing to return to session. At issue, that $2.5 billion in tax revenues from a 45-cent per gallon gasoline tax increase that the governor has proposed, though it has not been introduced. With lawmakers largely away from Lansing since June, I talked with Senate Democratic leader Jim Ananich about what, if any, progress he and other quadrant leaders have made in meeting over the summer. Can you tell me how those conversations have gone? Categorize them if you can.
Yeah, and normally I wouldn't want to say this, but it's been a little bit more sparsely than you think, right? You assume that we'd have been doing a lot more meetings over the summer. There were very few. We've been meeting since we've gotten back, and we have a pretty big deadline coming up, September 30th. So we have some work to do now. The appropriations committees were meeting, the appropriation leads were meeting. There were some conversations going on, but I think in the future it probably should be a little bit more regular. So we're not probably as far along on the budget or on roads as I think people expect us to be, and I think we should be. But we'll hopefully get it figured out.
Well, as we sit here, you are scheduled to be back in session on Tuesday of this coming week. And that gives you 15, 18 session days, something like that, to get a budget wrapped up. Now, I've seen this movie before where you come down to the last day in September and people stop the clock on the wall and try to get things passed. Are we in that kind of a critical phase, or do you think that we have a little better understanding? Because as we've talked about before, from my observation, you and the rest of the quadrant and the governor have at least forged some type of a understanding, a relationship.
Yes.
So are we working towards some resolution?
I think we're I would say we're kind of in between. I'm not in the place where I'm worried yet. I think we're farther along the clock than we should be. But we're definitely not in a place where we're going to have to necessarily do the kind of things that they used to do in the past. I think we can figure out a path forward to getting the budget done on time, as we always have in the last 8 years. I would have loved to have done it and kept it in June, but that's come and gone now. And then a path for roads. Now, I agree with the governor that we should do it along with the budget, but I'm not going to agree to a bad roads deal in order to get it done by the end of this fiscal year. So if we have to do the budget and come back to roads, I'm okay with that as long as we get both right. So I think we're moving in a place where we'll start to speed up the conversations and get some things done. So I'm not worried yet, but if we don't start moving quickly, then it could be a long September.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, because you could conceivably come to a budget agreement that takes care, and specifically schools, because schools have already started in many cases. Their budget started in July.
Yeah.
So you could agree to a budget that includes transportation but not the full road funding bill, and then come back.
Yeah.
The problem is for the governor that she would like to have some leverage in getting this done. So, I mean, that's kind of a tough.
Yeah, it's a real tough one, and it's a trust thing. Where I'm not suggesting we do that yet, and
right.
I agree with the governor. We should try to get it done together. But I don't think my caucus will vote for a plan because we want to get something done. We'll want to make sure we're a part of a solution that fixes the problem. We've seen, you've been reporting for a long time. We've seen people pass road bills that just don't do anything. Right? You just raise people's taxes and they don't actually fix the problem. We have no interest in that right now. We don't want to see a plan where we tell people we've done something and the evidence with their own eyes shows differently, which is what has been happening the last 5 years. The 2015 roads plan was a joke. It raised people's registration, it raised people's gas taxes, and it didn't fix the problem. That's not something that I think benefits anybody.
The problem that exists going forward is that you have majorities in both the House and the Senate that don't seem predisposed to the 45-cent per gallon gasoline tax. Over in the House, they've come up with a plan to move all of the sales tax from gasoline, and that would create $800 million or whatever the dollars are. But the other problem is, even if you had enough of your membership and over in the House that you could put that together with the Republican majorities, the Republican leadership is going to want a majority of their caucus to vote in favor of whatever it is. I mean, and I think sometimes people don't quite understand, but that's from a leadership standpoint. You can't just say, well, we're going to jettison what you think and we're going to use these Democratic votes if they exist. I'm not saying they do.
They might not.
Right. So that complicates it one more layer, because you have to convince a majority of the majority in order to get it to the floor.
Well, and this is, this is not completely related to this, but I think it's one of those things, those undertones. Since the Tea Party days, Republicans are so afraid to do anything that gets their base just not happy with them. That's the downside of gerrymandering, having one of the most gerrymandered maps in the state. Other than the fact that there's a number of downsides to it, but for them, the downside is they have to really appeal to a sort of a right-wing, anti-tax, kind of worldview that it's very difficult to solve problems. And so a lot of folks just don't want to do anything. I don't think that's an acceptable solution. We can't not do anything. The roads are crumbling around us. And unfortunately, I mean, it's on the majority's watch. Now it's on the governor's watch as well, and she's proposing a solution to fix it. But I think, the governor's had a plan on the table, very, very sophisticated, very thoughtful user tax. I mean, it's obviously a large tax, and I think none of us are relishing the idea of having to vote for it, but it at least solves the problem. We're waiting on what the Republican plan is, right? I mean, neither the House or Senate Republicans have a real plan forward yet. They've got some ideas, and nothing's really fleshed out. Even the sales tax idea, they haven't figured out exactly how to backfill the schools. Because I don't think anybody out there wants to see their schools in worse condition to patch a few more potholes, because you're not going to solve it with $800 million. So, we're expecting a real plan to come forward. Senate Democrats have a number of ideas. We've been waiting, obviously, to see if the governor's plan is going to move forward. But there's a number of ways to do this. We've been looking at it in this little lens here. If this is the only couple ideas you have, there's a lot of things that can be done to solve this problem for people, and I think we're willing to have that conversation either before September 30th or after if we have to, but we want to solve it.
One of the things that the governor presented when she put her budget forward, she talked about this whole balance of moving some money that had been siloed out of higher education that was backfilled from the regular education fund, and get that out of transportation, kind of put all these things back together. In other words, having the money allocated being spent in the areas that it was supposed to go to. That idea got a lot of praise in a lot of different quarters, but it came also with that pretty, as you described it, pretty big tax increase of 45 cents per gallon. And that kind of revenue, increasing revenue at that level at a single point, is a tough sell, even though that larger plan looked to many like it was pretty balanced. But still, it's the revenue. It still comes back to where you get that money. Have you heard, and again, this is about process, so I don't want to talk about specifics, but are there other revenue generating ideas that have been talked about that, from your perspective, are feasible?
Well, the majority leader, who and I get along very well, and I think one of the reasons we've talked about this in the past, and I think one of the reasons why I think I've developed a good relationship, no matter if it's Republican or Democrat, or as the things go on, is because I look at this like it's my job, right? Some folks get emotional about this stuff, and I understand that. There's passion that's important for being in politics, but once you step in the Capitol, you got to think of it. I think of it as I have a job to do for 275,000 people, and with thinking about 10 million in mind. So I don't allow this sort of differences of opinion or the kind of things that get said sometimes to get things off the rails. So the majority leader has an idea related to pensions, the teacher pensions, whether it's bonding off of the debt, and hoping that the market does better than the interest rates. With the economy the way it is, it's a bit of a dangerous gamble, but he's talked about that a little bit publicly. He's talked about spreading out the MIPSR's payments and taking some of that money. I think it's a non-starter for the governor, and it's definitely a lot of our members, myself included, have a lot of problems with that. We generally think we should solve the roads problem by not causing another one, and we should just, we have to acknowledge this is a very serious problem and take the steps that should have been taken before. I can blame the folks in the past for not doing the job, and they didn't, but I got elected to solve the problem now, so we have to figure out ways to do that. So, I'll listen to Mike Shirkey's proposal and get more details on it, and see what he has to say on that. Obviously, the sales tax, there's some logic to having the sales tax that's paid on gas go to gas, but we're not going to allow schools to be hurt. There's one thing that over the last 8 years, corporations and businesses in general have been given a huge windfall, right? There's just, in Michigan, individuals pay the vast majority of the taxes in the state, where corporations in many years actually have a net negative, where we give out more money to them than they pay in. I think a lot of folks in my caucus, but also across the state, would like to see some shared sacrifice. We supported the governor's plan, but if that plan is not going to be enacted, there's, you're seeing other states do, corporate activity tax, where you tax the gross receipts of all businesses equally. We have these mega tax credits that have been around for almost 20 years now. In 2006, 2007, 2008, there was a lot of logic to saying we got to hold on to these businesses the best we can. Some of those companies have had record profits for 10 years. Why are we continuing to subsidize companies when Michiganders are still not fully recovered, right? The economy is doing better, but a lot of folks are still living paycheck to paycheck. Why we would spend millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, and even more, on companies that are making billions in profits? It's a real questionable idea if that's even the best policy. If you reined in some of those mega tax credits, if you looked at some other ways to make sure businesses and everyone pays their fair share, there's obviously a lot of heavy trucks do a lot of damage to the roads, and they're paying the same as a Ford Fiesta. I'm not so sure if that makes the most sense. So there's a number of ideas out there. I'm not endorsing any of them right now, but I think the equation should be looked at from this size table as opposed to this sort of coffee size table. And I think if we look at that, we can find solutions to it.
One of the things that always comes back as I look at the process, it always comes back to mind is this. When you talk about the Senate Majority Leaders, I wouldn't even call it a plan, some of the conversations that he's had that have talked about teacher pensions or MIPSers or some of those other areas, or when you talk about a 45-cent per gallon gas tax, on both sides, you will hear people say that's a non-starter. So let's just pretend they're both plans and they're out there. And this group isn't going to start on this plan, and this group isn't going to start on this plan. So in that case, is there really a plan? Don't you really have to start at ground zero? Because if you're going to say this isn't going to happen, I'm not going to go there, then you have to find something else.
Yeah, that's the thing that makes me nervous, right? At the time frame we're at right now. This is Sunday, right? And so we're about a month and about a week away from getting something done. And hopefully cooler heads can sit in the room and say, okay, what do we have to get done here? Like, what's the most important thing? To me, it's investing in schools again. For the last 8 years, there's been cuts, and the cuts were so deep that even when they were adding, it just wasn't enough. People that are watching this, it doesn't matter how wealthy your school district is, your schools should have more resources than they do. And there should be more programs, and you shouldn't have to be paying for sports and band and all these other things that you didn't have to pay for before. That we just assumed that people in Michigan were going to have a good quality education for their kids. And if they've lived here for generations, they know that they had a better one before than they do now. And nobody wants that for their kids. So I think investing in our K-12 system, and even earlier than that, and then really investing in talent needs to be the focus. And I don't want to give that up in order to partially fund roads. So you can see how big of a quagmire we're in right now. I think we can solve it. I think we're big enough and adult enough to sit in a room and figure out, okay, I got to compromise on some of your things, you got to compromise on some of mine. There are some non-starters, so let's figure out other ways to do it. I don't know what those are right now, though. I've been doing this long enough to know I can read a room. I'm not a bad poker player. I can figure out by looking around, okay, what are you really willing to do? What are you not willing to do? And I can tell you in almost any scenario, there will not be 16 Democratic votes and carrying along 3 or 4 Republicans, even if that's what they want to do. We're not going to carry the burden of solving this problem alone. We're going to do it together. And I think that's an important thing. So, I feel that we have a path to finish this. We've had some successes in the past where we've worked together. I think we can use that as a blueprint. As I said on the island, this is the new norm. We're going to solve problems, and we're going to do it in a bipartisan way. I've not given up on that mantra.
The deadline for getting a budget done is September 30th, and that means about a dozen scheduled session days, that could be expanded, of course, to get an agreement that can pass muster in both chambers and get the governor's signature. When we come back, we talk with Senator Ananich about his hometown of Flint more than 5 years after the water crisis there. That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. In addition to being the Democratic leader in the state Senate, Jim Ananich is the senator from Flint. As such, he's been on the front lines of the efforts of helping the city rebound from the water crisis that left it reeling more than 5 years ago. That's where we pick up our conversation. I'm going to shift gears because we are once again back here in Flint, and we're in this very, I would say, not just multi-use, but just multifaceted building that I've never noticed before because it's a relatively new incarnation. But we've been coming here, I think, about every year for the past 5 to talk with you. You've been very generous with your time to come to Grand Rapids, and I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
But it's always interesting because you always bring me to someplace new. Talk to me a little bit about the state of Flint. We know that the process of replacing lines is still going on, but a lot of progress has been made.
Yeah, hopefully we finish by the end of the year.
And we're starting to see places like this.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. So this is they call this the Ferris wheel building. And just for folks that aren't from here, and even folks that are younger may not know, this was Ferris Furs building. So on the first floor, we're on the 3rd floor right now, there was the vault where they had all the furs and everything like that. The person who started Diplomat Specialty Pharmacy Company, he was a CEO for a long time, transitions out of that. He bought a few buildings downtown. This building in particular is sort of an incubator building. If you want to start a business in Flint or somewhere else, you walk in the front door and you basically almost move up the floors as your business does better and better. 90% of this building is occupied right now. And the good thing is they don't want it to be fully occupied because they want to have rooms for people that want to come in and start a business or want to go from one phase to the next phase in the business. So this has happened since we started having these conversations about Flint. The building next door is another one, a similar situation. It's the same owner. We just cut the ribbon for the Mott Community College Culinary Arts building across the street, the Credit Union building across the street. I mean, really, we have a lot of cranes and ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings going on. I'm going to go into a groundbreaking later this week for some housing development that came in as part of a match between federal and state dollars. So, we're definitely not out of the woods yet. The water quality is improving. There's no question about that. Overall for the system, some people still have homes that are definitely they should not be drinking the water. A lot of folks still use bottled water and filters. Everyone should be using filters till the emergency is called off. But we have had progress. There's no question about it. We've talked about this before, and I always am going to say it. This is a problem that never should have happened. We're trying to make lemonade out of a really bad problem. Our institutions are still having troubles. U of M's enrollment's still down, Kettering's enrollment's down, Mott Community College enrollment's down, the Flint schools are down to 4,300 kids. When I graduated in 1994, it was 25,000 kids. At the peak, it was 55,000 kids. So a third of the kids in Flint go to Flint schools, the rest go somewhere else. So, we still have some work to do. And I think we need to make sure not in the short term, but also the long term that the healthcare needs are there for these families. So I can definitely, I look at a lot of things and people do things differently, but if I have a desk in front of me, I have piles of things. The Flint pile's not going away anytime soon. It's just different things I got to deal with.
When we drove into town, we had to drive around to find a parking space. I don't recall that being the case even a few years ago. Is that just me because I'm not here often enough, or is that an accurate perception?
It's a pretty accurate perception. And around the corner, it's been about a year now. Sometimes it feels like it's quicker than that. It's been more sooner than that. But we opened up the Capitol Theater. It was closed for almost my entire life. I went to a Too Short concert there when I was in high school, but it wasn't an active theater. I don't know if it was. I don't know how I probably shouldn't be talking about that. But that's the last time I remember really going in there and using it. They have shows there now. It's a beautiful place. We're finding that a lot of conversations are going on downtown about parking. And that's generally a good sign, right? That's a good problem to have as opposed to we used to joke about when I was in high school and even after that was you could almost see tumbleweeds going downtown Flint. It was the safest place to be because nobody was here. Downtown Flint has high occupancy rates for the housing. There's new housing being built. There's a property that's almost finished, maybe 2-3 blocks that way, We have a lot of international students moving in downtown because U of M Flint was on the, very smart about going after, because it's a quality institution, they can go after kids from all over the world, and then we make sure that they feel safe. We still have some work to do in the neighborhoods, there's no question about that, and I think that is a priority of mine, to make sure that everybody in Flint succeeds. And that was a priority of mine before the water crisis. So it's urban communities, they're not easy fixes. There's just serious problems and disinvestment, and we've looked at urban policy for a long time, but there are a lot of positive things happening, a lot of positive things to build off of. And it's, if these things was easy, everybody would do it, right? So, we got some work to do, but I feel like we're making progress.
Flint has become a catalyst for looking at water quality and infrastructure problems well beyond the city limits. And I know that you and your colleagues, in a bipartisan way, have a big package of bills that's going to be dealing with some of that as we come back, because it won't be just the budget. It'll be largely the budget, but
right.
There will be other things that get done. Briefly explain to me what some of those bills would do.
Yeah, and I think to the first point too, if you don't mind, one of the things, I think we've talked about it, like I didn't want to see, I obviously didn't want this to happen, but I didn't want to see Flint be looked at as like a I don't want to call it like a tourist attraction, like people come in and say, oh, I've checked out this city that's going through this terrible crisis. I want it to be like, I wanted people to learn from the mistakes that happened here. And a lot of folks are reaching out. I mean, obviously we're seeing it happening in Newark. Other places are dealing with lead and PFAS. And I want to make sure that the mistakes that were made here and the lessons we've learned, people can start off a lot farther along. And hopefully we can get to a place where they don't even have the problem in the first place. So one of the things we're doing when it comes to the bipartisan package, bicameral, I've met a number of times and spoke, had a lot of conversation with the speaker about this. He's generally trying to help us get these bill packages a part of it. It's a number of things, whether it's making sure that renters have access to accurate information when it comes to their water quality. One of the bills, it's not in this package, but I think it's important to be part of the conversation, is where when you look at schools, there's an idea of testing all the schools. I think it's important to have that knowledge. But a lot of folks, and myself included, would say we should put filters on first, then test. Because I can tell you with the age of the buildings in the state, there's going to be problems. That doesn't mean it's across the board and everyone needs to be worried about sending their kids to schools. That's not the case. But there are going to be lead testing. And it's going to be, and the cost of completely redoing the entire building is going to be very expensive. And we need to figure out a plan to do that. But in the meantime, it just makes sense to put filters in schools, because we have our most vulnerable kids there all across the state. And so the filter first bill package I'm working on as well, just to have that part of the conversation. Part of the bill package is testing schools. I think it's important to have that conversation and have both in there. I think either one is a good model, but I think filter first is a better model. My bill in particular relates to Flint, but I think it's important. If you're going to do a water source change like we did in this community, you have to give public at least a year's notice, and you have to have a whole process in place to make sure you do that, because I think they operate as if switching a water source that had been for 40 years on Lake Huron water through a tried system of getting treated water, of now going to a river untreated, was going to be something that would be easy to do. And we can obviously talk about their motives or why they did that. It's not really even relevant for this bill package. It's about making sure that next community is protected if they decide to make a decision based on, I don't want someone making a decision based on cost alone. I want to make sure that they're taking all the steps needed to make sure that they're doing quality as well. Obviously the cost of water is a huge problem. That's also part of the package. Senator Stamas up in Midland, and a House member has it as well. I cannot think of who it is. Looking at transparency and rate making and all the things to make sure that we're not gouging people when it comes to their water as well.
We'll be back with more To the Point. The legislature returns to Lansing next week, and the focus will be all about the budget. The question is, can a grand compromise be found with divided government? That's something we'll be watching, and we'll bring it all to you. And we'll see you again next Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, right here on Wood TV for To the Point.